Yo, what is up, guys? Will here with Canyon from Fantasy Basketball Flock, and today we are talking potential trade rumors. The NBA trade deadline is coming up February 9th, and while trade rumors are typically, overblown, they don't really come to fruition. Big time trades happen around trade deadline time all the time. So just today, we're going to talk about Rui Hachimura moved and he's going to the Lakers. So, we get trades, and looking back at last season, James Harden to the Sixers, Ben Simmons and Seth Curry to the Nets, CJ McCollum to the Pels, Hallie to the Pacers, Sabonis to the Kings, Jalen Smith to the Pacers, Dinwiddie to the Mavs, KP to the Wizards. So while trade deadline predictions are really tough, I think it's something worth talking about, especially as we're approaching trade deadline time. Because while people tend to think that, it's just rumors, this stuff doesn't really happen. I mean, looking back at previous seasons, we've seen a lot of big time trades happen right around trade deadline time. So it's something you definitely want to be wary of. And while it might not totally overhaul the way that you approach these players from a fantasy perspective, I think it's something worth knowing, because if you're able to kind of get ahead of your league mates, be aware of these things, and maybe even, get to the claims, or you're trying to not necessarily trade for these players directly, but you just have that in mind for players' values that could drastically increase, that can really help you gain an advantage over your league mates. But before we get into the first one, if you guys could go down, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're interested in following us for fantasy basketball the rest of this season and in the off season as well. And if you guys want to check out player props on Underdog Fantasy, they're offering a promotion if you use code Canyon, 100% deposit match up to $100. Link is in the description. But let's get right into it. First one today, and it was on the list. We were writing the script, and then the news came through. Wizards trading Rui Hachimura to the Lakers. Per Woj, they're getting Kendrick Nunn, 2023 second and 2029 second, and then the worst of the two 2028 seconds between the Lakers and the Wizards. So I think for this trade specifically, we can actually talk about it like it's happening, because it is happening. And I think from a fantasy perspective, I don't think it's a massive bump for Rui specifically. I know a lot of people really like this move, and I do too. I think it's probably a better NBA move than it is fantasy move. I mean, obviously from a usage perspective, it's LeBron's team. Obviously, AD is expected to come back soon. So I like Rui, and I think he's going to, be good for this team. He's been a really good catch and shoot 3-point guy. He's going to have pretty solid games like we've seen from a lot of the Lakers guys this season. But I think the fantasy bump in value is really on the Wizards side. I think guys like Gafford and Avdia specifically are guys that I'm interested in. I think Gafford for sure feels a lot safer from an overall usage perspective. And I think both of those guys are really interesting, especially in games where KP's hurting out. And still, I think they get a higher floor, right? And we've seen a little bit of a sample size without Rui, and we've seen both of those guys have solid games. So I think both of those guys definitely get a bump. And I actually think they get a bigger bump than Rui does specifically with this move.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like you said, a better NBA move than a fantasy move. I think that's well put. And some of these trades might end up doing that, right? They might be better NBA moves. It's the first big, mid-season trade, so everybody in the media likes to blow it out of proportion. It's a solid move, but I wouldn't, drop everything to go get a guy like Rui Hachimura on the Lakers now. Next up here, I've got Jakob Poeltl for the Spurs. Trade rumors have been linked with him and the Spurs for a little bit now, but their asking price is really high. They're asking for a couple first-round picks, which is kind of crazy for Jakob Poeltl in my opinion, but what we've seen from the NBA in the offseason, especially last season, Gobert hauling in 4 first-round picks, they do get handed out, so I wouldn't be, put it off the table, so to speak, but he is also a free agent next season, so a team would have to, pay for that trade, and then they'd also have to pay to keep him around the next season, so he's kind of an expensive guy to haul in right now, but nonetheless, he is around the trade rumors for sure. And if he does leave, a guy like Zach Collins will probably assume most of that usage. They did sign Gorgie Jang to another 10-day, but it's probably going to be Zach Collins assuming a lot of that usage. We've seen a little bit of sample size of Zach Collins when Poeltl was out for injury, but with him leaving, wherever he goes, I'm sure he'll be a solid starter, but definitely depends on where he goes. But as far as the Spurs go and the void that has to be filled there, it's definitely Zach Collins for now. And we've already seen a little bit of sample size, and he could be, a good deeper league ad or a guy to stash if this move goes on and you're the first to react to it. He is a good upside play for the rest of the season. But again, we've seen a little bit of sample size here. There's still a lot of usage for the young guys, and it gets spread out a lot on the Spurs team. But that's if Poeltl is moved with that high asking price. Zach Collins would be the guy to kind of step into that role.
Yeah, and like Kanye had mentioned, we do want to talk through while we're calling out these players that would get a value bump, not necessarily a massive bump, right? We've seen Collins without Pirtle this season, and it's not like, I wouldn't expect Pirtle numbers. So I just kind of want to put that out there as well and kind of reiterate that, what Kanye had called out. Next up here, we've got for the Pacers, Miles Turner, who, if we've been making these videos every trade deadline, we probably would be talking about Miles Turner. So I think just in calling this out, I want to say probably not happening. There's been trade hype around him for literally years, like years upon years. We've been talking about Miles Turner potentially getting moved, even heading into seasons. But if a move were to happen for a guy who's been in trade rumors for a long time now, guys like Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith would see a bump for sure. It's been a little weird. I think we've seen Isaiah Jackson, we've seen Turner be out, Isaiah steps in and has a monster game, and we've seen games where, Turner's in and he's not actually really backing him up, and we're seeing more Jalen Smith and some other guys as well. So I think that's a kind of a tough situation to pin down, but obviously if Turner were to be moved, we would see a bump for both of those guys who, guys like Jalen Smith especially were, popular sleeper picks this season, but obviously we've seen kind of Turner dominate in that standpoint. But yeah, I definitely think if a move were to happen, it's hard to call out for the players being moved, right? So we don't want to speculate too much on Pirtle or Miles Turner. But if these guys were getting moved, you'd assume it'd be going to situations like a Rui going to the Lakers, a team that's kind of trying to buy a player. It's a little different, right? I think Rui's, the expectation is the Lakers acquiring him, expected to, re-sign him long-term moving forward. But for a lot of these team that's going to be acquiring these players, most likely is, focusing on this season and trying to win now. So from a fantasy upside perspective, not as much.
Yeah, definitely. The next team here that's surrounded with trade rumors is the Raptors. It's guys like Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. the most. I know there's been talk about OG Anunoby, but the Raptors have made pretty clear that OG is valued very highly there. It would take a big old hole to get him out of there, and I think guys like Gary Trent and Fred VanVleet are the ones that would be going this midseason trade deadline. They were linked with the Pelicans for a little bit. CJ McCollum talking behind to the media about it as well. But if that kind of trade would happen, I'd expect something in the package of one of these guys, VanVleet or Gary Trent, for like a package of the young studs. The Pelicans have a lot of those guys and some draft capital. If not, a guy like B.I. or Val, I doubt they would do that. But, obviously as far as the Raptors side goes, this would bring a lot of usage to guys like OG, Scotty, and Siakam. I mean, these starters for this Raptors team dominate so much of the volume, production, and fantasy production in the team. And OG shoots a good amount already, and Scotty, they all get their volume, but Gary Trent, man, there's a lot of nights where he's shooting close to 20 times a game. Same with VanVleet, they both have to pull the trigger a lot, so that is a lot of usage that would be going around if one of them were to leave or both of them were to leave. It would probably give a significant bump to OG, Scotty, and Siakam, depending on what they get in return, but this is kind of one of those trade scenarios where this is a kind of a bigger usage gap that could be left for the Raptors, and I think what we've seen out of the Raptors in the past, the starters would be kind of the first up to kind of assume most of that void. If not, maybe guys like Precious or the guys that are kind of coming into a bit more of a role off the bench. But again, that would leave up to speculation, what the team looks like after the trade is done, who they get in return. But for the most part, those are two high shot volume guys that could really, cause a benefit for guys like OG and Siakam, most definitely in the shot volume aspect, and then Scotty all around, of course.
Definitely. And those Raptors guys just play massive starter minutes. So, obviously removing some of those kind of high usage shot guys, but obviously a lot of speculation we're talking through. That's the point of the video. Next guy up, it's the Hornets, and it's Mason Plumlee. And I do want to talk about just in general, these teams, there's a couple of them who are, pretty much or already just eliminated from play in contention. So a lot of these teams obviously come trade deadline time when they have these veterans with expiring contracts. Most of the time they're looking to move, right? Calls are being made to, maybe send guys like Plumlee who, joke around and say what you will about Mason Plumlee. He's kind of having a career year right now. So I think a lot of teams could use kind of a rotational big like Plumlee to kind of play decent minutes for them because he's playing really well for the Charlotte team, who's obviously not doing great right now. But I think specifically for the Hornets, obviously a lot of injuries this season, obviously not a great start midway point to the year for them, but they've got a lot of young bigs who I think moving Plumlee would kind of open up minutes for a lot of these guys. which honestly, in my opinion, I'm surprised they're not playing more. Guys like Mark Williams specifically. I know there's a couple other interesting bigs that we could talk through, but I think Mark Williams is the big one who per minute has been pretty solid game in and game out, but obviously just isn't seeing the consistent minutes. And that's kind of been a Hornets thing. There's been conversations where, coaching staff has talked through, the guys who are deserving the minutes are going to play. And that's kind of why Plumlee's playing as many minutes as he is. But I think from a trade perspective, I don't want to say it's necessarily more likely, but definitely likely for some of these teams who are eliminated to make these moves. So would not surprise me at all if we do see someone like Mason Plumlee moved. And, Mark Williams, I think he's a guy who, probably is a guy who's kind of been picked up and dropped and picked up and dropped when he plays these, 19, 20, you start seeing, maybe 24 minutes and you think he's kind of coming into the rotation. Then he comes in this, most recent game and, plays 9 minutes or something. And he's dropped again. But I think he's really hitting the point where he's starting to, over the past 3-4, starting to play like 20 minutes. And man, if he's doing that and he can give you high upside blocks and decent scoring and rebounding numbers, would definitely be exciting from a fantasy perspective. So I think in deeper leagues for sure, he probably should already be rostered. But if you're in a deep league and you're deciding between, two low minute bigs, I definitely would lean Mark Williams just with the upside that boom, out of nowhere, he's able to play 25, 26, 28 minutes a night because of a move like Plumlee to a contender.
Yeah, selfishly, I would love to see them move Plumlee because Mark Williams has shown some really nice flashes, and he would be a really exciting young guy to give the green light to. Next up here, though, for the Knicks, another pretty much a fringe guy, Cam Reddish. This isn't much of a, high alert, Cam Reddish might be traded, go get him. It's more of a slow your roll, Cam Reddish might be traded, yes, it's all around the news. He hasn't been playing for a while for the Knicks. Thibodeau's already been giving kind of the green light to guys like Quentin Grimes and McBride, even when he was there. I think he likes those two young shooters more than him. But even if he gets traded, I would assume it's going to be for a contending team that wants a spark off the bench. Cam Reddish can be a solid scorer, but I doubt he's going to go somewhere where he's going to start. He's probably going to come off the bench somewhere, play low 20 minutes, and just be told to go get buckets. Not probably a lot of peripheral stats either. So this is kind of one that, it's probably on your radar. You're probably seeing it, but I wouldn't get too excited about a Cam Reddish going anywhere. It's just if he leaves this Knicks team, we're probably are going to see what we've been seeing out of guys like Quentin Grimes, who's really been stepping up lately and shown some flashes this season. And again, wherever Cam Reddish goes, don't ruin your waiver wire just to go get him. But it's something to keep an eye out for.
Definitely. The next up here, a guy who's been, there's been a lot of conversations, and it's kind of a weird situation, and it's the Hawks with John Collins. And he's a guy who's kind of been brought up as a potential trade guy, and I think there's a lot of conversations, but I don't know how likely it is that a move actually happens. And we've seen Woj talk about it with the contract, over the next 3 years, this, $25 million a year. And I think that's tough for a team to take on, and there's a lot of conversations about, potentially picks being added on and Collins being kind of a salary dump trade, but he's played pretty well. So I think there are teams that would be interested in Collins, but obviously uninterested in the contract that he's tied to. So it makes for, difficult situations, but Woj has reported that, come trade deadline time, he's expected Collins to be a popular name. So I think there is a chance we do see him moved. And obviously, depending on what kind of move it is, if it is, more of a salary dump move, the expectation, coming back to the Hawks is probably not, anyone of massive value if it's more of a dump trade. And, it would open up things for guys like Hunter and Griffin and guys that we've seen, be pretty decent, but have kind of inconsistent games just with, positionally what the Hawks have. Obviously at the 1 and 2 with Trey and Murray playing a ton of minutes, but Collins as well. It would just kind of open up things a little bit more. So this is one I would definitely keep an eye on, but would not surprise me at all if Collins is just a Hawk for a little while with that contract.
Yeah, starting to feel like a Miles Turner type deal for John Collins with the Hawks. Last up here, we've got our sweet Pistons. After letting the Bucks drop 150 on them, they're going to actually trade their whole team to the G League Ignite for that team. But no, Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks are the primary suspects on the trade block for the Pistons. Obviously, both two guys that have kind of come into some good situations for both of them, played very well in their own likes for this young and kind of struggling Pistons team. And Dallas has, continued to come up in reports for a guy like Bojan, but they're asking for a lot for both of these guys, multiple firsts and what have you. And even if they trade them, I doubt they would trade for like a guy that would make them win now. They're obviously rebuilding. We've seen what Troy Weaver's done with his moves as far as the timeline goes, so it might, maybe if it's a player, it'd be like another young guy or a savvy veteran for the future. But at the end of the day, they just want picks. They want draft capital if they move them, and they're asking for a high price. So something kind of similar to the Pirtle situation where these teams are really hanging on to these guys. Say, hey, they're playing well. Might as well have them continue to play well and teach our young guys and just raise their stock for us, and we could try to sell them high. And I don't know if many teams are going to bite on that for them right now. But, a guy like Bojan is definitely an attractive asset for a lot of these contending teams with how well he's shooting the ball. So it's just a matter of, someone wants to pay the price for Bojan. But if Bojan does leave the Pistons, obviously that leaves a lot of offensive usage. He's kind of the mainstay, and Burks off the bench, kind of the two mainstays in those two rotations for the Pistons as far as offensive usage goes. So definitely would open up some more usage for guys like Ivy, Killian when he's back, Sadiq Bey maybe coming back into stride. So I would assume it would be spread out more than likely, those kind of shot production and volume from those two guys. But yeah, I don't know if, someone wants to meet those high demands for them yet.
For sure. And I know a lot of people, maybe are heading to the comments right now to talk about, Detroit signed, Bogdanovic to an extension. And while that is true, it's happened, before where teams have signed guys to contract extensions and still move them with that contract. So wouldn't be out of the question. And, the deal isn't insane or anything. I think it's something that a win-now team would be willing to take on if they were able to, meet the price that the Pistons are asking for. And yeah, and I just want to call out, man. I mean, Bogdanovic has had a great season, and he's a guy that I love as a Pistons fan, but I think a lot of win-now teams would love to acquire a guy that's shooting as well as he is and scoring as well as he is, and adding a guy like that to your team. I mean, people were talking about him to the Lakers, and think about how amazing of a move that would have been. But obviously the price more than what teams are asking for Rui. So I would anticipate potentially these guys staying, even though I think it makes sense for the Pistons timeline to potentially move these veteran guys who are performing well. But we'll see. And just in general, we'll see with all this, right? We're obviously, a ton of this is speculation, and we're kind of just talking through just the reports that we've kind of seen, trade rumors. Happens all the time where, none of these happen and it's a ton of other moves. But I think these are kind of popular names that have been thrown around. So let us know in the comments, maybe your dream trade scenario, something you think is realistic, or anything that you've been hearing or are seeing, or maybe even just want for your own team. Would love to see that. And as always, you can ask questions in the comments. Love seeing those and going through those. Appreciate you guys for watching. Like and subscribe. See you in the next one.